Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justin the Food Entrepreneur Show. I'm Justin Bizzarro. I'm your host. That's Bizzarro. For anyone who's out there, you can find us on Instagram at Justin the Food Entrepreneurs or at Justin Bizzarro. You can also find us on Gorilla Brave on Instagram. There is a private community there for food, beverage, nutrition, farming, and hospitality entrepreneurs. It is a private group. There are links that can be given if you reach out, if you are a food and beverage entrepreneur, on a set of questions that'll allow you into that group. So it is free. We are taking all the information, trying to give it on Instagram and then into that Facebook group as well, because that's what everyone's asked for. Education, growth, stories oriented that way. There's now summaries in every episode, timestamps, so people can scan through them and find the particular details they heard and go back and re-listen to it. So all of that's there for everyone moving forward as we've gone into this season. And what I mean by this season, I mean the recordings that started being released December 25th, 2024. That's when I relaunched. Every episode before that had actually slowly trickled out basically from 2023. I had taken a leave in absence. So that's why the gap there. That's why the change in the format. That's why the change in me. That's why the transformation in the orientation of the show. I got time off, a lot of reflection, really heard what everyone's feedback was, and the pause helped rebuild the show, rebuild our platforms, rebuild the social media, rebuild the networking stuff we're trying to do in the education, and actually do it the right way. It's always going to be a work in progress, and we're going to take our time. But that's to answer a lot of those questions that are coming in. By the time this episode comes out, that'll help with some of those too, as you guys have them as episodes previous have been recorded. That information's coming out there. So I had Ben G Bronson back with us. He was on Justin Bizzarro's show. For all of you guys out there, I'm crossing him over into this. It's very important. I have a lot of questions about writing and tracking and legacies and books and recommendations and marketing and advertising and photography and all this type of stuff. Someone that I've known that does it well, that has had a career that's doing it in Los Angeles, getting into documentaries, obviously in the books, obviously in the photography. So I asked Benji back. This time, we're going to focus more on these specific skill sets he's developed, but I am going to give him time to quick reintroduce himself, talk about his story, the growing of his business, his travels over the years, and sort of anchor that. So Benji, the show is yours. I'm going to let you have the microphone. Tell your story again, maybe abbreviated version. And then I want to dive into all the pieces we just talked about.
Absolutely. I'm just going to, rhyme off the top of my head. I'm Ben G Bronson. I used to be a musician back in Canada. I was originally a solo artist and had a sort of YouTube hit that charted next to Beyonce in 2013. She had Girls Who Run the World. I had my song Light My Way. And, things moved on from there. I ended up having a band for a very brief time called the Modern Fever. We had a #1 hit across Canada on the NCI Countdown, which was really, really cool. But we ended up not getting funding. And although we did get a lot of media appearances and tons of buzz, we didn't end up getting more than a deal to write for other artists on Sony Canada. And then the A&R guy who worked out that deal with us, him and his whole roster were dropped. And, I decided I was going to go look at other things. And in that time, I investigated STEM, all sorts of stuff, entrepreneurship. That was, people talk, a lot about starting businesses. And I had been told, from a very early age, people said, "Oh, you're so entrepreneurial. You should start a business. You should start a business. You should start a business," which is a very novel thing to, tell a child, but it, actually starting one, there's a lot that goes into it. And I was very fortunate to connect with a business that needed services. And they basically set me up with my own delivery company. And that was my first really successful business. My photography business had done well too, but that was not like a full-time thing. But, getting my own courier service and doing that for a few years and having the freedom of being an entrepreneur, getting to, choose my schedule, getting to travel throughout the United States and deliver in the States and get to know more Americans and things like that. It was very, very eye opening. For the first time in my life, it's ironic, but when I was doing music, I was so busy on the promotional trail all the time for 2 albums that I didn't really actually get to travel very much and meet people, because everything was very much centered around the music and centered around interviews, appearances, and things like that, which is all wonderful. I'm grateful for those experiences. But when I had my courier service, I got to actually take vacations, which turned into kind of networking adventures as well. I met some wonderful people in Texas who, gave me a lot of other great ideas for business. I ended up having the option of either taking out a $250,000 loan. I was approved, ready to go to expand my courier service, or I had the option of going back to school. And I'm not a huge fan of school, but something told me that the borders were going to close and my cross-border delivery business would not be a good investment, and that if I went along with that, I'd be ruined. There was nothing really in the media to say that. This was very much an internal notion. I said, I think Trump's going to close the border. And people said, you're crazy. He'll close it to Mexico. He's not going to close it to Canada. I said, I think that border's closing, y'all. And I went back to university and I got, I got through. And by the time I completed my degree, I fast tracked through and got it done in 2 years. COVID happened and the borders to Canada and the US closed. And so I would have absolutely been, out on my butt, basically, and with, holding the bag for a massive loan had I made that choice. So I don't know what that was. I believe in God, and I do believe God spoke to me and gave me that foresight. It certainly didn't come from the newspaper. It certainly didn't come from pop music. And so it had to come from somewhere.
Well, and I want to emphasize this. I think anyone who's looking for miracles, we think about miracles as these objects or substance on the outside, or vision, things that happen. But these internal things, these feelings, these notions, those are also the miracles. I agree with you. And to have the ability to listen. And, I think the greatest thing that we learn is discernment in our belief in God, is the ability to discern what we're supposed to do and not supposed to do, and be able to hear that. We're not always great at it, but I think I want to just anchor that anyway. So
that's a great thing to anchor, and there's a lot, there's a lot of different gifts. Not everyone has discernment. Other people have, other things too, but, discernment is super, super important. And that's actually come up with many of my authors, which I guess, brings me to, 2020 rolled around.
Yeah.
I had a great little job. I lost contact with my work friend, Rosanna, because, things closed so quickly. I mean, I got done school December 2019. January, I had a job offer. They were handing me and Rosanna a contract that came in with St. Regis. And, the people who were senior members there were not happy that these, newbies showed up and got the biggest contract handed to them. And then, 14 days later, I never saw anybody again because everything closed. And I had connected with a great guy in Detroit who was a cookbook author, and his name's escaping me right now. But he really taught me a lot about, it was Bumble before Bumble was a dating website. When Bumble was just for business people, I connected with other marketing people, and, he told me the ins and outs of self-publishing. He shared so much information with me. I mean, the kind of stuff that, if he had wanted to charge, it would have been very much worth, $500 to $1,500 at least. But he was very, great with the information. He was very, generous with what he let me know. And I started working on, publishing independent books. And then before long, with the shutdowns and everything, everyone was on social media. I started connecting with writers, a U.S. Olympian, Crystal Manning, with, her mom, Antoinette. They were fantastic. Actually, I get to hang out with them in Los Angeles now in real life. They took me to an award show recently, which was an awesome adventure, and just more and more people connecting. I feel like at that time, there was a lot of people who were obviously very stressed out. But, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I think there was a lot of people who were entrepreneurial, working overtime, and they say, okay, well, if I'm locked up and I'm stuck on my computer, I need this for networking. And I eventually ended up connecting with a company that was BAM Entertainment. They brought me down to the US. to basically be the graphics guy and do, interior layouts and things for books. They, saw what I was doing, and, Mitchell, who owned the company, saw, some of the work I'd done, and, thought, okay, well, you can put books together, and you can put them together really well and really quickly. So, I need you for like 6 books. And that was an awesome experience. I got to go all over the US. So while, Canada was locked down, oddly enough, the borders were closed, the land borders, but you could fly out. And I went on this awesome adventure and got to learn even more about self-publishing and publishing, working with all sorts of different talents, and doing tons of design work. And then I came back to Canada when that wrapped up and connected with, so many people. I basically meet 3 new authors a week. And, I started doing consulting. And, one thing that I'd learned when I was working in the States, Mitchell would get consultants to kind of, advise on things, and, hearing them talk about all sorts of things was great. But whenever they talked about the marketing, I thought, they sound an awful lot like me. Maybe I could have a job as a consultant. And I thought to myself, oh, no. That's not for me. That's not for me. And, just a few months later, I was a fully 100% remote consultant working with hundreds of authors. I've actually lost track of how many authors I've worked with to this point. It's well over 200 since 2022. And we've had, over 35 number one hot new releases, and even books that are not just number one in their categories, but books that are top 100 overall on Amazon. Independent authors showing, their work alongside many, many traditionally published authors, and as I sometimes call them, major label authors.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about, let's go back for a second to showmanship. I'm going to take a full circle again. Let's go back to the artistry, the being part of a band, a hit, the being on the road, the PR, the stuff like that. It obviously taught you a lot of skills that you're using now in being in the businesses that you have. And we've only touched upon one technically. And so, but let's go back to the artistry, the being part of a band, the PR. What is it that you're learning during this time that is so useful to you?
We had just a quick interjection. One thing I've learned since, everyone always says, do what you love, work what you love, with what you love, keep going, and that thing's going to happen. I was working so hard to become a musician. I never thought books was going to be a thing. That came right out of left field. So sometimes things can take a turn, but like you were saying, it is the similar competencies. And oddly enough, there is a lot of similarities between music promotion and book promotion. The parallels are endless, and that's one of the things that I think helped me with what I do now. As a musician, obviously charts are very, very important. Being a charting artist, obviously the Billboard is the top place to be a charting artist, but there's other places. There's radio stations that are their own countdowns, genre charts, things like that. In Canada, there's the CBC has their own countdown. There are others as well up there. But seeing how that can help give an artist visibility, I definitely translated that to books and started really, really pushing my authors to make a chart impact. Obviously, not all of them can get to number one, but I've had an awful lot of them get to number one with coaching. And that's one of the things when I do my consult calls, I'll spend probably 25 to 50% of the call just talking about Amazon, because it's such a huge retailer. They do 60% of ebooks, 40% of printed books. So, some people say, well, it's not the New York Times bestsellers list, but I would say in some ways being on the charts on Amazon is more relevant because there's no editors picking their favorites. Whereas, with the New York Times, there have been some authors who have complained that they should have been featured, but the editorial team decided to include someone else because there is that creative direction component of their countdown that has become a source of frustration for some people. So I think the Amazon charts are not only a great place for an author to build a reputation. Social proof is so important. So it's one thing to say I have a book. There are roughly like 4 million independent books alone that's not sorry, there's 4 million books a year published that are independent. That's not counting the traditionally published books. So right there, it's kind of, as some people would say, a red ocean, that maybe would be harder to dive into. So it's that much more important to stand out and to assert yourself. And so, battling your way up to the charts, it doesn't have to be number one, even being in the top 50 in your category, something like that can just give people that social proof where they say, oh, well, if it outperformed, the lower 49 books, well, maybe I want to take a look at it. And that can be your foot in the door for retail. That can be your foot in the door to get more press. That can be your foot in the door for all sorts of things.
I love this. Okay, so let's talk about you get into books, you're finding success in this, you're finding success in consulting. You're a believer in God. I'm going to anchor all this. There's a lot of core values. That's why I think we connected in the first place over Instagram, a lot of shared core values. Talk to me about the core values that you feel are necessary to have built this consulting business. I mean, you're doing very well right now from a consulting standpoint as an independent. And I agree with you. Amazon is more important at this point because of the amount of weight of sales that it has and the access to its customer base. So,
are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Yep.
I'm not sure what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no worries. I'm still here. And so talk to me a little bit about the transition from there and that and how that is and what that looks like from consulting to a greater purpose, because you are involved in other things. We talked about them online a little bit here. What do those look like?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about the, sorry, I'm actually just going to switch from speaker so that there's a sound that's coming through. There we go. How about that? Can you still hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm not sure what I was picking up there. I wasn't sure if you were hearing that on your end too. But yeah, besides working with, over 250 authors roughly, I have gotten to work with other types of businesses and artists and filmmakers. A wonderful opportunity came up, and, I do social media and content with Knowledge Tree Films. Those are great guys. You should definitely maybe reach out to them at some point. They've got a lot of great things to share, and I think with core values, one thing that I observed, and it's not just good for business, but it's good for life, obviously growing up and being around the music thing, there was some pretty shady people around, and, got to go to all sorts of different venues from people, with people who, had all sorts of different habits and things like that. And, I did notice that some people's lives were fraught with more drama and chaos than others. And, there was usually one common feature amongst these people. And it was usually a certain level of, honesty was missing. And there's an old saying, you can't cheat an honest man. And I think that, a lot of people who end up, in controversial situations, in many cases, one mistake leads to many, and they open themselves up for, fraudulent activities because they're not 100% on the up and up, and I think that if you just basically follow, being honest and just representing yourself, in a front facing open way, that's a good foundation. You're maybe not going to get the hyper growth that people who, talk themselves up a little bit more will get. But also too, managing expectations is great. You don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. And I think the fake it till you make it attitude, I don't think it works as well as people say it does. I think that there has to be something real there.
Yeah, I agree.
The
ego and pride can only get you so far, and that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And eventually, people are going to want to look at the bank statements, or they're going to want to look at the resume, and and that's to say, there's people who say fake it till you make it, and they're very talented people. Like, they're not quote unquote fake at what they do, but they have to pump the perception so much that casts doubt on the things that they have real talent for. You know what I mean? And so you're only as strong as your weakest link. And you don't want any kinks in the armor. that's another saying. A producer I worked with, would say, like, everything's got to be even across the board. You can't just have a good song. You have to be able to do it live, and you have to, have good photos and, good videos, and, and be consistent all the way across, and so I think honesty is a big part of that, and conducting yourself in a way that's personable. Yeah, you do want to stand up for yourself, and, you don't want to be a pushover. But, at the same time, you don't want to go around being cocky. You don't want to be overly aggressive, because you will just end up and dishonest, because, there is sort of a like finds like mechanic in this universe where, you kind of get what you put out.
That is 100% true. I agree with that. Or a lot of times if we put, for lack of a better term, shit in there. Sorry, everyone. I'm trying not to curse on the episodes. We get out way more piles of it than we put in. And that's the reward. And the opposite is true with good too. I feel like in honesty and truth with a capital T, not what we want to be right truth, not that type of truth. I'm talking about the doing the right thing, living a life of humility, serving those around us, those type of things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about, like, in your coaching, because these core values is part of the reason I asked the question. The core values anchor their way into your consulting with the authors. They're part of their reason they do so well is their ability to handle the climb on the way up, because that's important, right? And you know that also from your past experience, which is why I asked this question. I think restaurateurs and entrepreneurs go through this a lot, where our rise can be our very destruction. And in order to handle that, we have to remain honest as in these core values, but you obviously help guide them in that way. I mean, as your clients rise up the charts, how do you manage that? What are the ways you sort of make sure they stay anchored?
A lot of them, are more mature people. They're coming from other careers and, becoming authors, either as like a side hustle or, because they have a message they really, really want to share. So I've been really fortunate. A lot of them are very, very grounded. There are some that have come across my desk who are, maybe, I don't want to say kooky, but some of them are lovably kooky, and some of them just don't have a really realistic grip on reality and, what needs to be done. And, I've noticed really that, the ones who have more experience are more willing to trust me speaking from my experience. You know what I mean? Whereas the ones who are maybe greener in an entrepreneurial sense, sometimes, will not let me do my job. You know what I mean? There was one author who I consulted with, and he had his wife was not a very nice person, and she didn't even let him get a word in edgewise. And she was I was they didn't want to really do much online promotion for their book. He was somewhat well known as a poet, like, in the past. I just let them know that, like, you're gonna need a home on the web for new audiences to be able to just see more about you. It can't just all be in the book. It's almost like having a resume, to think of it like that. And her response was, okay, you got me there, but, I wasn't going for a gotcha moment. It wasn't supposed to be an argument or anything like that, but it was, I don't know what the arrangement was. I think it was wife/manager, but, so and people like that who, they have a sort of an adversarial take on a consultation, and thank goodness, like, they were a very short-term client and they only had one consultation because I wasn't going to do them any good. You know what I mean? At the end of the day. And, if you don't want to do anything, and you don't want to, be online, it's unfortunate, but, having an online presence, it is part and parcel, of being any sort of entrepreneur. And no, a website doesn't necessarily sell a book or sell a business, but, without it, you're not going to have that check mark. People can't do their research. They can't see what the reviews are. They can't see more about you. It's harder for a client or a new fan or a new customer to trust you if you don't, have that place that they can reference and find out more.
Yeah, it's a credibility thing also. I agree with you. I think there's just things that have to be put out in the world, even social media now, that add to the credibility of things, or the what I would call the reinforcement, if nothing else. And they are necessary. I agree with you. I think I still find a lot of businesses that haven't grabbed on to the internet, and then especially social media. And I'm like, you could have the best burger in the world, but if you aren't accessible to the generations that find things in this way, they're never going to find you. Word of mouth
Right.
only goes so far in today's age before it gets shot out of a cannon. It starts off as word of mouth, but if you're not on social media to get shot out of the cannon, it doesn't matter. You need to be accessible to leverage. And if someone shares it in a video, but they can't tag you, you're kind of like the Sasquatch. Everyone knows
exactly.
People have seen you, but they don't know where to find you exactly, and they're always on the hunt. But how do we find you? That's what it is. And you need to be, if you want to be public in any way, business, in restaurants, we just by nature turn that way, not necessarily as the entrepreneur, but we make our businesses that way. Is that we start to understand that without it, we're dead meat in today's. It doesn't even matter. You could have the best location in the world, in most places, New York City being an exception maybe, but if you don't have any backup or social media and stuff, and you're still doing well, you're missing an opportunity to do really well.
Absolutely. No, and I like what you said, for people to just, you'll be like the Sasquatch without it, because, there's lots of businesses and lots of authors with similar names, similar book titles, so being able to, have that reference point where they can be like, oh yeah, that's the guy, or that's the girl, or that's the burger shop, that's really, really, really important. And, I think with the nature of social media, there's so much going on. It's always changing so fast. I don't blame entrepreneurs and authors for being like, is this really right for me? But I always say, like, if you're not going to be heavy on social media, you have to at least have a website. If you don't have a website, then you've got to be really heavy on social media. It's nice to have both. Not everyone has the resources to do that, but you definitely have to have, one or the other. And I think, with a website particularly, you can arrange the information the way you need it to be arranged. Whereas with social media, you have a very small little bio, usually with a link to your website, and then you have a feed. So the information you might want people to know, might end up at the bottom of the feed. Whereas if you have a website, you can put the important information at the top and then just, update people on social media, which I think is a great balance.
I agree with you 100%. And it's just interesting, and AI and all that's going to take a lot of this stuff in some cool directions, but AI needs to be able to find you.
Yes. And, an AI reads off of a lot of it reads off of websites.
Exactly.
I've had some authors and, also some service providers, and some of them, show up better in ChatGPT than others. And I noticed that what ChatGPT was learning about certain authors was coming straight from press releases that I wrote. And that obviously really put a light bulb on my head. I love doing press releases. I love doing PR. And really honestly, I really like publicity more than performance marketing. But that's something that's really changing. And that's a subject for a whole nother podcast. But, seeing that and seeing how, I'm actually putting the information into ChatGPT, it's just another benefit to what I'm doing, but also, makes me rethink, okay, well, if this is maybe going to stick around and be translated by an AI, is there anything else I can put in there that's going to optimize that?
I agree with you. I think there's a level of thing. The other thing I want to point out in our conversation is what would be called, marketing there's a lot of touch points: advertising, public relations, sales. Okay, there are 4 separate spaces, 4 different, ways of doing things that are all useful in the tools to run a successful business. But my point being this is there has to be multiple avenues. It's just like only using Instagram. As much as I love it and I'm majorly focused on it, one of the things I've had to do as I've relaunched everything is I've had a lot of pressure to start preparing stuff for threads to release. I've had, okay, you need to do more on Facebook. You need to separate out these things and have them bits and pieces and tags. And you need to rebuild a website, because the one you have, I got to be frank with you, Justin, that's what they said to me. It doesn't really give us anything, for the main reason of we live in a world where all the information is pulled from the things we have out there, from our social media, from the things we write in our posts, from our blogs, from the things that are written about our books in this case, or our restaurants, our quotes in the newspaper. These things are all now being consolidated for us through AI. It's important that we understand that putting out the information in all the avenues, not only to reach different humans, but also so the information can be powered in ways that lead to whatever it is that's meant to lead to. We don't necessarily know. We don't have to know. We just need to be able to put the information out there so people can grow from it, and I think that that's an important thing. If you're in these businesses or public facing businesses, is there is a lot we give to the communities or our base or whatever through our books or our restaurants or whatever. And we touch a lot of people's lives. Why not use that for more and more impact and influence, not for greed or whatever, but being able to leverage the message that you're trying to do for further whatever. I don't know, whatever they're passionate about. Maybe it's the novels or creativity. I love what Adam Sandler does about building schools and stuff, or educational opportunities, whatever it is. So, I think there's a lot there that we just talked about. We never know unless we continue to pursue the opportunities and be open to it.
Absolutely. And it's not just what you've done, but it's what you've done lately, and to kind of keep the ball rolling.
Yeah, exactly. Talk to me about what you're doing now. You're in Los Angeles. So we kind of jumped around, but you were in Canada sort of when we last anchored, and you've kind of made your way into the United States. You end up in Los Angeles as you're also doing the books the last 2 years. Let's talk about that transition. You've now taken your business, your experience in show business, and literally gone into the Red Sea. And, a little bit, let's talk about sort of that and what you're doing with that and that experience and growing within that, and also growing that through your skills.
Absolutely. Well, I still feel really, really new to Los Angeles, and the way it works as, a non-American, I was bound to a lot of visa programs and things like that. Without going into too much legalities and details, now I'm in a position where I can work like an American and take on more opportunities here in the United States, which is really, so this, it's really a new beginning. And, one thing I noticed in Los Angeles is, people are a lot more relaxed than I thought they would be. People are very, very chill, very easygoing. Some of the easiest going people ever. It wasn't kind of, the chaotic Hollywood entourage scene that, it's sometimes portrayed on TV. And, what I noticed was, people, whether they were up and coming or established, that people were getting to do what they want to do and getting to do what they love. And, whether they're mega successful at it or not, there is just a different, personality type and a different energy with the people like that who are actually getting to express themselves. They're not as uptight. They're not kind of holding on to something, whereas people who maybe don't have an outlet would be maybe a little bit more anxious or uptight. So I think that that's something really interesting that I observed that I wasn't necessarily expecting, and it's also great to get compliments and, on the photography and things like that, from people who are, doing wonderful things and have really great quality work themselves. That always feels good, obviously, and getting opportunities as well to work with new people. And, I really believe that, with my photography that, I have that gift, to really help build people up. I really don't look at photography as necessarily being about me. Obviously, we do have to have our certain number of photos of ourselves to brand our social media to us. But, I really love doing portraits of other people. I really love to capture people's work, their performances, their businesses, all sorts of stuff. And, getting to do that always makes me really, really happy. And also if I can get to see that it makes a difference for, the person on the other side of the camera, which I've been fortunate enough to see, that feels really, really good. It feels good to make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. What's next for you, Benji? Like, sort of, where do you hope this goes? You're aligning a lot of different skills here, right? And you're working on, documentaries potentially. So there's skill combination here too. Like, there's a lot of things where you continue to stack skills in your life. God continues to put you in situations where you stack additional skills. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's one thing is, I always, make sure that I'm getting something for my resume out of everything that I do, whether it's book related or film related or whatever. And again, learning something new that I can market later. I've been really aware of the fact that, oh, sorry, my phone I'm going to put my phone on silent.
It's all good. I didn't hear any of it. It's
Oh,
silences. Yeah.
sorry.
It's
Sorry
good.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
go
just heard a
ahead.
ding go off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. What was I saying?
We were talking about that
Oh,
you've been fortunate enough sort of stacking skills and things like that.
yeah. So, anytime I do something, I'm always, conscious of how that's going to be portrayed and what I'm going to be able to market in the future, with whatever task that is. Like for example, having a career business was not a childhood dream, but, I got to cross the border every day, which showed that, I was very trustworthy and that I had a clean record. So that was something that was very marketable there. I also got to work with, law enforcement every day and present, paperwork and things like that. And, keep all the declarations and everything organized. And, if there was a problem with a declaration to, be able to call the right people and get the paperwork cleared up, all that stuff, which were all really, really marketable, for anyone who needed any sort of business administration in any way. So, like things like that, and how can I add that to my resume and put it in a way that's going to, encourage people to want to work with me, or put it on my website if it's not on my resume. Anything you do, whether you're flipping burgers for a clown, or what I mean, if you're selling shoes at a shoe store, there's something there that you're learning how to do that will translate, to other industries. And if you get really good at whatever it is, managing expectations, or, dealing with disappointed customers because the shoe they wanted didn't fit, and being able to help them find an alternative, things like negotiating, you know what I mean? And things like that. Like, these are things that can be very, very handy, in sales, in business, whatever. And I think a lot of people, work jobs that they see as trivial. And as a result, they trivialize everything that they do within that job, and they don't do themselves any favors. It's not about, faking it till you make it, like we were talking about, like, but it's really about finding out what those core competencies are that you're developing, being able to identify what you're developing in yourself and how you can use that to create value for other people in the future.
Yeah, one thing that I think is one of your core values is exposure to the world. I talk a lot about education, experience, and exposure being the three core anchors of leadership, of anything, faith, whatever. It's the beginning points, whatever we attach onto it, energy, exercise, whatever onto those three is important. The more of those type of things we attach on there, great. But I think you go and you experience the world, you travel, you put yourself in situations that are uncomfortable for yourself, and then it forces you to grow. There's an intentional doing that in your life. You're constantly doing that. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why. I mean, it's a drive of yours. It's the growth that we can talk about from when I interviewed you 2 years ago almost to now, and just as an entrepreneur is enormous. So obviously it's with intent. You can't grow as much as you're growing without intent. And you
Oh, well,
can't grow
thank
as
you.
much as you're growing without building the capacity to grow. Those are two things I just said there for everyone. You got to build the capacity. It's like a muscle. And people who do it, you notice it. Because they become like Renaissance men. They can pick up things. They become skilled in life in multiple things. It's okay to focus on many things and become good at them. Just don't do it all at once.
Right. Yeah. Be obsessed or be average. And,
Yeah.
people said, are you going to get back into music? And I've told them, I said, well, I'm obsessed with books right now. And there's not like a hole in my heart that I'm not like slinging a guitar around and knocking on, doors and things like that. Like, I really, I like to do things. I like to get obsessed with what I'm doing, and usually being obsessed with it makes me enjoy it more, and to really, really, dissect, what makes something work, in this, whether it's an industry or art form or something like that. But also too, I think, it's almost like, like you talked about, like building a muscle for discomfort. I think, like, the word I use is like, building tolerance. Like, there were people that I met throughout my life that had a very high tolerance for getting paid and a very low tolerance for working, you know, and that was sort of a mismatch. And hey, they were still getting by, but there was only certain jobs they could do that
Yeah,
kind of fit within
exactly.
that spectrum.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And, and
100%.
yeah, it was, so, no, I'm not casting any shade or anything on them, but that was just, the thing that I noticed. And I definitely push myself. You talk about exposure. I was probably really a little overexposed at an early age, and that maybe may not have always been a good thing. But again, that's one thing is, the being in, a public arena now, there's things people complain about for sure, but generally people are a lot more tactful now than they were 10 years ago. I mean, it was totally okay to just publicly abuse, the 19-year-old singer-songwriter from a small town. Like, it was totally okay to do that. And
Yeah,
not even if you didn't like the music, just plain old sour grapes. And
yeah,
now people are a lot more respectful. Obviously, there's more security measures in place, and and also to the algorithms are a little bit different too. So people are seeing more of, what they like. If they really, hate certain things, they're not going to see it as much, presumably. So that's really, really changed. And so when people complain about it now, I think, well, you really wouldn't have liked it 10 years ago, because you'd probably have really, really hurt feelings. But
yeah.
I think that, being prepared to handle things aren't always going to be positive. I've been so fortunate, things have been so positive in recent years, and I'm really, really grateful for that. Of course, there are stressful moments, there always are, but I think pushing myself at an early age and being really, really ambitious, just I kind of raised my tolerance for things that are very, very uncomfortable, because I didn't feel like I had a choice. I wanted to do something. I grew up in a household where the TV and stuff was on all the time, so I got to see. That's another thing too about Canada is, Canadians in many cases, are just spectators for America. It's, and there's so much more to do here. People are doing so much more, whereas it's the society up there. There's not as much opportunity. I mean, it's a math thing, because I mean the population's huge here in the States. It's one country that's as big as, like, well, basically each state could theoretically be its own country. So it's like 50 countries rolled into one. So so that comes with a lot of, opportunity, and a lot of excitement, and a lot of, just a lot going on, and a lot of inspiration too. And I almost credit my parents with not restricting how much candy I could eat, not restricting how much TV or video games I could watch. I At a very, very early age, there was always candy in our house, and other kids would come over, like, "Oh my God, there's so much candy!" And I'd be like, "Yeah, do you want some?" And the kids would eat. I wouldn't even eat some. My friends would have some of the candy. I would, because it was going to be there later. If I didn't feel like it, I wouldn't have it. Whereas I think the parents who restricted the candy, it became like too special, and the kids maybe wanted it more. You know what I mean? And the same for the TV and video games. It was on. It was available all the time, and I got bored of it. I'm bored. I get bored watching TV. I get bored playing video
Oh
games.
man, it's so interesting you say that, because it was the same for me. It was the same, and I do believe that. I think if we take it away, all it is something that's going to be tempting forever. It's just a little bit different when it's there. There's some maturity that happens with it, and the consequences, for sure. I'm not saying everything. It's not like we're talking about everything, but I do agree with you. Learning certain things and having the freedoms definitely changes our ability to self-regulate ourselves, self-manage ourselves, versus
Yeah.
trying to rebel against that. The rebellion is more or less independence.
Yeah, and then later on, in my teenage years and stuff like that, while everyone else was really starting to explore, different types of entertainment and, maybe TV shows and food and stuff they weren't allowed to have, I was like, okay, well, like, I kind of want to start actually exploring making things. And I figured out that like would rather, you know, make a photo than look at one, after a certain point. And that it was really more fun to challenge myself and learn about how things worked and to, take what I learned from watching and try to apply it to what I was making. I liked the lighting in this movie and the color in this, album cover and stuff. And like, okay, now I can put those together and, put my friend in it or something like that, and just kind of exploring and getting more and more creative. So yeah, I think, having the ability to kind of observe and not having the pressure to necessarily produce. Then, as I got older, I had the option. I knew that if I wanted to relax or whatever, I could watch a movie. But there were years where I didn't watch really any TV, like, basically from about probably 2006 to probably about 2015. Like I didn't really see a lot, like really a lot of TV shows and movies from that era are like new to me if they come up, because I was just so busy making things and going around and meeting people and and doing stuff, because that was what I was more interested in. And and I basically learned what I wanted to explore, and I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. I knew, those TV shows and those movies and that candy, it's all going to be there later, but now is the time where, for example, I didn't want to be like in my 50s being like, hey, listen to my mixtape, or my demo tape.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's a lot cuter when a 19-year-old, pulls out like a song that they wrote than someone who's like, 50. Unfortunately, it's unfair. It's unfair, but there's a lot of things in this life that are unfair. And I knew that from an early age. I said, this is the time to do this little band thing, not later, because there were adults and stuff who were critical and said, you should just like get a job at a factory and like do it when you retire. And like all those factories are closed now, by the way. So if I had done that, I wouldn't even have a factory job right now.
Yeah, I think that's often we are being led in a direction for life. Okay. And then I think that's important, that feeling that we get, that lead, whether it's creativity, what some see as rebellion. It's a loyalty to what's been created inside of us. And I'm saying within obedience and within discipline, obviously. But I think that this is an important lesson for the entrepreneur as well. What our parents did and what their generations or what great grandparents or what our kids or their kids are supposed to do is different. We all have our roles along the way. So I think that's sort of, we're also talking about is so there's a compounding that we need to understand in a lot of ways, and following what's truth of us gives maybe life to us or others in our generation.
Absolutely. And it's also, makes it a different story because, that's the thing is, yeah, I have to drive home the point. I did not have stage parents. I didn't have I didn't have entrepreneurial parents. My dad had worked, the same type of job. He was in STEM, and they, my parents like went to school. They worked for other people. You know what I mean? And that was really, really common for a lot of people. I didn't grow up with a lot of entrepreneurs. And I think that might have helped make me more, curious about it. But yeah, I didn't, have a stage parent pushing me out, and overexposing me. I think that's also too with, a lot of really famous performers where they're maybe pushed into it a lot and then they kind of have those negative experiences. And since they really didn't sign up for it themselves and they were kind of pushed into it, I think that just really makes it even more negative for them. I can look back at like some of the really bad stuff that happened to me and I can say, oh, I signed up for it.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I decided, yeah, right. And I think learning that our decisions, like we get to make them, and we need to learn our lessons so they don't happen to us. But if we buffer it in ways as parents or too much as society, I think there's not the growth that's necessary to continue to grow society or grow families or grow legacies. So, I mean, I agree. They allowed the freedom.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's, having freedom to, freedom to make mistakes, freedom to explore, freedom to be curious, and it's like, but I can totally understand like where, if I had kids, like where I would kind of want to push them and stuff like that. But like my parents were more hippie-ish, and like I just ended up very, very self-motivated. They didn't care whether I brought home a trophy or something like that. So if I went into a competition, I knew damn well that I wanted to win it. And, I would go in with that level of seriousness. And
Yeah.
actually, at one point, I remember there was, did I just say member? The member berries? I was having a little South Park moment. But I remember, I was winning
Uh-huh.
an award, and there was a more stage parenty, wealthier family, and the mother of the kid who was, he had a band. They bought him like a whole studio and everything like that to really help him, which is amazing. That was not something that happened for me, but good for them. And she just made this remark. She says, "Oh, well, that must be another award to add to your trophy roll. Must be getting quite full now." And I said, "Oh," and I remember I snapped back. I said, "Oh, not compared to my brothers. You should see his." And he won quite a lot. He was really like he was really good at school and stuff like that, and karate. And so I wasn't even lying in that moment, but I had that quick little response back to that sort of backhanded compliment. Which, can you imagine being a parent and saying that to someone who's like your kid's age?
I know. Right.
Canada's not as nice as people think it is. So, but the lack of maturity where I come from is it's hilarious. But that's probably why I have a great sense of humor.
Yeah. That's one of the things I've realized as I've grown as well, is there has to be a level of humility and understanding that there's just maturity levels of it, both in parenting, both in business, both in life, both in church, both in wherever it is that you are, community and business and your food, in the hospital, it doesn't matter. You just have to deal with some things that there's no way of changing it. Just, it is what it is, and they are where they are. I think that's part of the anchoring for the entrepreneurs out there is, do not get stuck in your growth and always be seeking truth, meaning further and further maturity in yourself and exploring. We just talked about a Renaissance person. Anything you want to share with the entrepreneurs out there, anything that you think might help, any lessons learned, anything about the books, the consulting? I mean, it's all yours. You can take as long as you want. I just want to make sure that I give you the time to sort of speak what's on your heart or
I think,
on your soul.
well, thank you for that. I know I definitely sometimes conversationally, it seems like I'm jumping around more than I am, but really like everything is connected. And that's kind of what I've learned, because I've had a few people here in LA kind of criticize me, like you're tying a bunch of unrelated things together. And like I have like, and then I'm like, okay, if Yoda were here, he'd whack you with his cane, because like they're not actually unrelated. Like that scene where, where Luke levitates the rock and then Yoda tells him to levitate the whole ship. He's like, it's different. And Yoda's like, no, it's not different. And then, Yoda does it. And it's like, I think, that's something I want to really tie together, is like really everything. They say it, they talk about, the circle of life and everything's connected in the ecosystem. It's just as true in business as it is in nature. And really, like, businesses are almost like little kind of like financial organisms, and they have like their own sort of health and life cycle, and there's a lot, it's like a machine, it's like an animal, it's like everything's kind of, has its own sort of way of functioning. And you can apply all sorts of different, things that we see in machinery and, in the natural world, and see how it relates to business. All the pieces have to be working together. Basically, it's got to be healthy. The rest of the ecosystem is important too, what's around it. You can't have like a super amazing, perfect, shiny business, that's like in a crater, basically. Unfortunately, certain laws of nature do apply. And as and you speak about, Renaissance people, and I think that's actually something to really, really drive home, not just for people who are already entrepreneurial or people who are really looking into it, but just people in general. One thing that, I have, I have a lot to thank social media for, and I try not to complain about it too much. But one thing that does bother me about it is the algorithms and how specific it is, and how creators are basically finding ways of making the same thing over and over again. And, you know, you'll get famous because like your dog bounces on its front two paws every time it's excited, you know, and that's going to be your shtick. You know what I mean? And there's not a lot of room for you to play the violin, you know, because people want to see the dog bounce on its two front paws, you know, or I don't know if you've seen the people who act like NPCs. I think that trend is dying down, but the people who would just sit there and repetitively, you know, act like a video game character, you know, and just respond to the emojis that come in like that. Like no one's going to want to see her star in a movie. And I'm sure she's probably an actress or a singer or something, but they're going to want to just watch her play the NPC game. You know what I mean? And so that's one thing is I think, you know, we're as a society kind of communicating and giving people, you know, feedback in a way that makes it seem like they can only do one thing and only be good at one thing. You know, we see it all the time. Like, oh, if you're good at sports, you're not going to be good at art. You know, that's kind of always been around, but I think that the algorithms are really doubling down on giving people tunnel vision and having them get so specialized and so specific about what they do that there isn't as much creative liberty. And so for people to remind themselves, okay, you know what, like maybe you're going to get famous for having like, you know, the best bacon on a burger. And like, you know, the algorithm's really going to show off your burgers and your business is about burgers. And you know what, that's going to be your main thing. You can still be good at other stuff and you can still pursue other things, you know, even if, you know, you are tied to a bit of a shtick.
I agree. I think because it's just that's shorter, the concentration's shorter than we think it is, and the attention span is going to get shorter. And the diversity of skills is important. If I think about how many times people, like in 1998, when I was young and trying to integrate computers and shared systems and central databases, people thought I was crazy. Now it's the way of the world. Okay. But okay, social media advertising on Facebook, we started doing it in 2008. It changed the trajectory of our food and beverage businesses in a lot of ways. It's when we stop doing it that it cost us. It's when you listen to the crowds and stop doing what's working because you think that their opinions matter when they have no opinion because they're not even trying it. I think that that's one of the things at social media, these skills that we're stacking. You should stack them in a good way. You need to stack many of them, and you need to understand that your reputation, your character is part of everything that you do for longevity. And I agree with you. I just saw a thing the other day. Someone passed this on for them to be on the podcast. Manager or agent or something. Pretty famous food person, maybe. They haven't really started a business, but they do this thing where they eat in a way that I'm not even going to say it on the podcast because I will not give it dignity in case everyone knows. But it's in a way that I just am like, that's not representing the restaurants well. That's not representing him well. In the long run, this is a joke. And I get it. It works. It's probably making a money on YouTube because people are just watching it like nonstop. And maybe it brings people to the restaurants. But at the end of the day, what happens next? You're going to do that forever? Maybe have enough money to do something else with, I hope. But I agree with you. You need to be able to leverage it. Maybe that is your thing right now, and maybe it is a vehicle for more. I pray that that's what it is, because right now it is obviously getting a lot of eyes, but it's just, oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm here nor there. Maybe I'm getting old and I'm getting old fashioned, as they would say. But no, we need to think about character of our businesses, character of our families, the longevity, what happens when my grandchildren look at all the videos in my Instagram and everything like that. I think it matters now. It's more permanent than ever before.
Yeah, wow, grandma could eat an awful lot of Cheetos back then.
Yeah, it's weird, right? No.
That's why she only lived to 27.
The flaming hot ones especially. But I agree with you. So I know that was my last question. I appreciate you coming on, Ben G, onto the show. Anything else? Where can they find you online? Where can they find your businesses? Where can they find you if they want to inquire about consulting, about books, all of those sort of great things?
You know what? I am launching a website soon. Well, relaunching. I've just started rebuilding it. It's kind of a bit of a digital makeover that's was supposed to be done by February. Obviously, I've been distracted, with all the wildfires and stuff like that, and fleeing to Missouri, which I've been so blessed to be invited here to hang out. But that's going to be a source. Obviously connecting with me on Instagram at northern_maverick. Don't be shy. Send me a message. I love hearing from people. And, also at Knowledge Tree Films on Instagram and knowledgetreefilms.com. I'm not featured on that website yet, but, if you have questions about film, marketing, things like that, that's going to be a great place to learn more and book anything you need.
Yeah. Benji, I'm going to ask you to book another time with us for sure, just because you build personal brands for people in the author space. You help them do that, what they choose and don't do. I think that's part of consulting and getting a book up there. I know that that's what you're doing for yourself too, is building a personal brand by having all these skills, because that's how we are able to give the skills back to the world. I think that that's important just for everyone out there when they're like, don't understand exactly how all the pieces are put together. We don't need the world to necessarily understand it. The equipping is preparing us for whatever it is we're being prepared to do. And it really happens in the entrepreneurial world. I don't know why the crossing of things, the mixture of skills, the multi-tools in the toolbox, they're relevant. Especially if we seek them and we pursue them, they become very relevant. And if you believe in God, it truly is a God thing. That is the path that is happening there. Our path is to be equipped as much as possible. Some of it's armor, some of it's weapons, but all of it is for the benefit of our lives and the lives of those around us, including the animals and the plants and the planet that was created. So regardless, if we all think about legacy, that's what we're talking about here. The longevity of our lives, the longevity of the universe, the longevity of our impact. What does that mean? Well, we got to take advantage the most we can with the life that we have now to learn the most that we can, because the more we learn and give now and give back and help grow in return for the state of the future, the more they have. That's why there's been such growth industrially and in the world and technology since World War II. There's just, after such catastrophe, there was a lot of fighting for life and growth, as a lot of societies, as a lot of Western societies for sure. So anyway, I'll leave everyone with that. Thank you, Ben G, again. I look forward to having you back on.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love what you do with all your podcasts. I think when it comes to entrepreneurship, business, things like that, there's never too much of this content out there. I follow lots of different entrepreneurs besides yourself, and each one has a different way of communicating. And I think that's one of the great things about a podcast and having, different guests on, is that, the way I explain things today, it may not resonate with some people out there. They might not get it, like, this guy's crazy. But then someone else might, have the same exact message, but they'll have a different background, different competencies, and a different way of communicating it. And then it might really sink in and make a difference for them. Also, too, repetition is key. And when people hear something 2 or 3 times, usually sinks in better. So, what you're doing right now, is making a huge difference in people's lives. The inspiration, people sharing their stories. It's so much more enriching than, listening to, a gossip blog or something like that. So I think, it's really commendable what you're doing. And I can't wait to see, how this grows for you and, all the different great people you're going to be bringing on in 2025.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And Benji, that means a lot. I really do appreciate that. And you came into my life at a great time, and I've been able to watch you grow as well. And I know there's going to be a lot there. And some of the stuff that we're working on, guys, related to networking and summits that I'm going to work on, I'm going to invite Benji to some of those things, to be a part of some of those things, because he has a lot of knowledge that is relevant to food and beverage, that is relevant to our industries about that I talked about personal branding. How do we tell our story? How do we get it in a way that the world matters from our restaurant? A lot of chefs and stuff have stories to be told. So he's a valuable resource. I'm going to invite him. We'll see if he comes. No pressure since I said it online, but or on the air, I guess, technically. But I just want everyone to think about these things. This is why I'm arming all of you guys. This is what you asked for. All the other podcasts I do, all the information sort of being merged into Justin the Food Entrepreneurs. And then it's replicated on the other one specifically for those outside of the food space and those looking just for leadership type stuff. So it breaks down to two possible pieces. One just for entrepreneurs in general, outside of food. And then the other one's leadership. So you guys can see that on Justin Ryan Bizzarro show and the Centurion Leadership Battalion. So thank you everyone for listening in. I love you guys and we're out.